This story is titled, My Ex-Wife Told Our Adopted Child She Was Only With Me for Money, Not Love, so I made sure she got nothing in the end. Sup Reddit, I'm a 42-year-old man who works in network security consulting, and I've been married to my wife Victoria for a little over 20 years. She's 36 and we have a 16-year-old daughter together named Sophia. For the longest time, I genuinely believed our family was doing well. Not perfect by any means, but good enough to feel secure and content with what we'd built together. Turns out I was completely wrong about that. Let me rewind a bit and paint you a picture of how this all started. Victoria and I first met when we were both in our early 20s. I was working 2 different jobs at the time, desperately trying to break into the tech industry and establish myself in a career that could actually support a future. She was working part-time at a local bookstore, and I remember being drawn to how down-to-earth and genuine she seemed compared to other women I'd dated. Victoria always told me that she appreciated how grounded I was. She'd say things like how she liked that I was focused and practical, not flashy or obsessed with showing off. She made it clear that she didn't care about money or material things, at least not in the way that seemed to drive so many other people. I'll never forget some of the things she used to say. I don't need some rich guy, or I just want someone who comes home every night and doesn't lie to me. Those words really stuck with me at the time, and I believed her completely. Looking back now, I realize how naive that was, but I genuinely thought I'd found someone who shared my values. We built what I thought was a solid life together over the years. I moved up slowly but steadily in my field, picking up some decent consulting contracts and making smart decisions along the way. I even invested early in a few tech companies that actually panned out well, which gave us some financial security I hadn't expected. We were able to buy a house and eventually pay it off completely. We were never the flashy type, no mansion, no collection of expensive cars, nothing over the top, but we were comfortable in a way that felt sustainable. Victoria drove a nice SUV that she loved, and Sophia had her own iPad and phone by the time she reached middle school. We made sure to take at least one vacation every year. Nothing extravagant, just relaxing getaways where we could spend time together as a family. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, but I'd done well enough in my career to feel genuinely secure about our future, and I thought my family appreciated that stability. I had always handled our finances, mostly because I was the primary breadwinner, and also because I actually enjoyed the process of budgeting and investing. Victoria stayed home with Sophia for most of our daughter's childhood, which was exactly what we both wanted. I was happy to provide for my family and take care of the financial responsibilities so that Victoria could focus on being there for Sophia. For a long time, this arrangement worked perfectly for all of us. Until it didn't. The change in Victoria wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was slow and subtle, which is probably what messed with my head the most. One day she was the same woman I had married, chill, supportive, and completely down to earth. Then, bit by bit, I started noticing little shifts in her behavior and priorities that made me question whether I really knew her anymore. Victoria began caring way more about her appearance and how others perceived her. Makeup became an everyday necessity rather than something she did occasionally for special events. I want to be clear that there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting to look good. That's not the issue here. But it represented a fundamental shift from how she used to be, and it was just the beginning of a much larger transformation. Soon, it was professional manicures every 2 weeks, regular spa days, and girls' trips that seemed to pop up more frequently than they ever had before. Every time I brought up these new expenses during our monthly budget discussions, she would wave me off dismissively with phrases like, "It's just once in a while," or "We deserve to treat ourselves after everything we've worked for." I tried not to push the issue too hard because I figured maybe she was just rediscovering herself or going through some kind of personal growth phase that people talk about after years of being focused primarily on motherhood. But then Sophia started picking up on these same attitudes, and that's when it really became a problem for me. This was the real punch to the gut that I wasn't expecting. Sophia used to be the most thoughtful, curious kid you could imagine. She would ask genuinely intelligent questions about how money works, how investments grow over time, and even what taxes are for and why they matter. We used to sit down together and go over her allowance, helping her figure out what made sense to save versus what she could reasonably spend on things she wanted. I was genuinely proud of those conversations and the financial literacy we were building together. I really believed I was raising someone who would know how to handle money responsibly and understand the value of the work that goes into earning it. But lately, she had been rolling her eyes whenever I said no to her requests for expensive items. She started throwing lines at me that I'd never heard from her before. Things like, "Why are you so cheap about everything?" Or, My friends have way more fun than I do because their parents actually spend money. Every time we tried to have our old conversations about money and budgeting, she would start repeating phrases that I swear I had just heard her mother say the day before. Things like, "You act like we're poor when we're obviously not," or "Other dads actually spoil their families instead of hoarding everything." I honestly don't know if Victoria was actively feeding her these lines during their private conversations, or if Sophia was just absorbing them naturally from being around her mother's new attitude all the time. But it didn't really matter in the end. The damage was being done either way. My own daughter had started seeing me as nothing more than some stingy bank account that said no too much, rather than the father who had worked his ass off to provide everything she'd ever needed without her having to worry about a single bill or expense in her entire life. One evening that really crystallized how far things had deteriorated, Victoria and I were sitting at the dinner table eating together when Sophia walked in from her room. She asked if she could get a real laptop to replace the one I had bought her just 6 months earlier. When I asked what was wrong with the laptop she currently had, she responded that it was embarrassing because everyone else at school had better equipment. "We're the only ones living like this," she said with the kind of exasperation that made it sound like we were living in poverty rather than a fully paid-off house, with every comfort she could possibly need. That word, embarrassing, really stuck with me. Here was my daughter, talking about a brand new laptop that I had carefully researched and purchased for her less than 6 months ago, as if it were some kind of shameful piece of junk that reflected poorly on our family's status. Instead of backing me up or even asking for more details about what was wrong with the current laptop, Victoria didn't even blink. She just kept eating her dinner casually and said, "She's not wrong. That thing is super slow and frustrating to use. Maybe it's time to upgrade to something that actually works properly." I stared at her in disbelief. This was a brand new machine that Sophia primarily used for watching YouTube videos and typing up Google Docs for her school assignments. There was absolutely nothing wrong with its performance for those basic tasks, and Victoria knew that as well as I did. "Well, maybe she wants something that actually works without freezing every 2 seconds," Victoria continued, doubling down on her support for this ridiculous request. "You're always preaching about investing in quality products, aren't you?" Sophia immediately jumped back into the conversation, emboldened by her mother's support. "Everyone at school has MacBooks, Dad. I actually get made fun of when I pull this one out in class. It's embarrassing." I sighed deeply, trying to maintain my composure while processing what I was hearing. "So what you're telling me is that you want a $2,000 laptop so you can scroll through Instagram and half-write essays that you don't even turn in on time? That's not fair," she snapped back immediately. "You just don't want to spend money on me. You're always like this with everything I ask for." I turned to look at Victoria again, hoping for some kind of rational support or at least acknowledgement that this request was unreasonable. She finally looked directly at me and said, "Honestly, Marcus, you can afford it. Why do you always make everything into such a battle? You have all this money sitting in various accounts and you act like we're broke whenever anyone asks for anything." I looked at both of them sitting there, united in their frustration with my apparent cheapness, and calmly told Sophia that the laptop she currently had worked perfectly fine for her needs. If she wanted something fancier or more expensive, she could get a summer job and contribute to the cost herself. She scoffed at that suggestion and said, "Why should I have to work for stuff when we obviously have money? Other people's parents just buy them what they want without making it into some big financial lesson." That was the exact moment when I realized I wasn't just dealing with Victoria's changing attitude anymore. I was losing Sophia too. Victoria had been systematically dripping her version of reality into our daughter's head for who knows how long, using the same arguments and the same logic. She had basically started cloning her own resentment and entitlement into our daughter's worldview. I decided I needed to try talking to Sophia one-on-one, away from Victoria's influence, to see if I could understand what was really going on in her head. I sat her down privately and asked what was happening between us. I told her honestly that I felt like we weren't close anymore and that she seemed angry at me all the time for reasons I couldn't fully grasp. She just shrugged with that dismissive teenager attitude and said, "You're just always saying no to everything we ask for." I tried to explain my perspective calmly. "That's not true, Sophia. I say yes when requests make sense and when they're reasonable. I just don't believe in throwing money around for no good reason or buying expensive things just because other people have them." Her response was immediate and telling. "You have the money, so why not use it?" And there it was. Almost word for word, the same argument Victoria had made during our previous fights about spending. It was like hearing an echo of my wife's voice coming out of my daughter's mouth, and it made me realize just how deep this influence had gone. I tried to help her understand that this wasn't really about what I could or couldn't afford. I explained that it was about being smart with money and making thoughtful decisions. I reminded her how I paid for everything in our lives: the house, the food, her clothes, her phone, her car insurance, everything she needed to live comfortably, and that not everyone gets to grow up without worrying about basic necessities. I tried to help her understand that the security and stability she took for granted didn't just happen automatically. It came from years of careful planning and responsible financial decisions. She rolled her eyes at me and said, "Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with saving every penny, Mom wouldn't be so unhappy all the time." I honestly didn't know what to say to that. I just sat there for a minute, absorbing what she had just told me. It wasn't just that Victoria had been systematically turning our daughter against me. It was that Sophia now deeply believed this narrative. She genuinely thought I was the villain in our family story for not spending money recklessly and for trying to maintain the financial stability that kept a roof over our heads and allowed us to plan for her future. I was still sitting there, processing this conversation long after she had gone back to her room. I didn't follow her or try to continue the discussion. I just sat there staring at the floor, trying to wrap my head around how everything had flipped so completely. The daughter I thought I was raising to be financially responsible and grateful for what she had now saw me as some kind of obstacle to her happiness, and apparently my wife's happiness too. The tension in our house was building every single day, and I could feel it in every interaction. Victoria and Sophia would go shopping together without telling me where they were going or what they planned to buy. They'd come back with bags full of stuff and just shrug when I asked what any of it had cost. Victoria started brushing off any conversation about money or budgeting with dismissive comments like, "We're fine," or "You worry too much about everything." I started second-guessing myself constantly. Maybe I was being too controlling about our finances. Maybe I did need to loosen up and let them enjoy the fruits of all the work I'd been doing. I mean, what was the point of working this hard and building this level of financial security if I wasn't going to let my family actually enjoy their lives? Then one day, something happened that made me realize the money issues were just the tip of the iceberg. I checked our joint bank account and discovered that Victoria had withdrawn $2,000 in cash. The transaction was labeled as house stuff, but we hadn't bought anything for the house recently. I usually kept a decent buffer in that joint account to let our auto-pay bills run smoothly without me having to monitor it constantly, and I should have been checking it more often. But that's what trust used to look like in our relationship. I trusted her not to abuse that access. So I decided to look back through our recent statements more carefully. What I found were 3 more significant withdrawals over the past 2 weeks, all with similar vague labels that didn't correspond to any actual purchases I could identify. I kept acting like I hadn't noticed anything, continuing to smile and go about our daily routine. But something deep inside me felt fundamentally off. And it wasn't just about the money disappearing. Victoria had become completely attached to her phone in a way that seemed obsessive and secretive. She used to read actual books in bed before going to sleep. Now she was scrolling through her phone all night long. She started putting her phone face down on the nightstand whenever I was around, and she began taking it into the bathroom with her every single time. She had even changed her lock screen passcode, which she'd never bothered to do in all our years of marriage. Whenever I asked who she was texting or what she was looking at, she'd give me short, dismissive answers like, "Just friends," in a tone that made it very clear she wasn't interested in being asked again. The whole dynamic felt wrong, and I started getting genuinely paranoid about what was going on. I'm not proud of this, but I started checking small things around the house. Her purse when she left it out, the trash can for any suspicious receipts, even her email when she left her laptop open. Nothing obvious popped up during these little investigations, which somehow only made me feel crazier and more suspicious. It was like I knew something was wrong but couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Then came the night when I found something I definitely wasn't supposed to find. I wasn't actively snooping or going through her things on purpose. I was just looking for a portable phone charger in our bedroom drawer, the one next to her side of the bed. I was digging around through the usual clutter of cables and random items when I accidentally knocked a small plastic organizer off the back of the drawer. When I reached down behind the drawer to retrieve it, my hand bumped into something that was wedged between the wall and the back of the drawer. I pulled it out and discovered it was a phone. A second phone that I had no idea existed. It wasn't in a case, didn't have a pop socket or any personal decorations. Just a plain black phone that looked like the kind of burner device you see in movies. I turned it on, and it immediately buzzed to life with a flood of notifications. The screen lit up with alerts from Tinder. Not some discreet dating app for emotional support or friendship, but full-on Tinder for hookups and casual dating. The most ridiculous part was that I didn't even need to guess what her password might be. It was Sophia's birthday, our daughter's birthday, and it unlocked instantly. There it was, right in front of me. Message conversations with multiple different men, flirty pictures that she had sent, and responses like, "I can't wait to meet you in person," and "He doesn't treat me the way you would," and "I just need to find a way out of this situation." I stood there for probably 10 minutes just holding this phone, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. My ears were ringing, my face was burning with anger and humiliation, and I wanted to throw the phone across the room and confront her immediately. But instead, I took a deep breath and placed the phone right back exactly where I had found it. I closed the drawer carefully, walked out of the bedroom, and sat down on the couch to stare at the floor, like it was going to somehow give me answers about what to do next. Everything I had worked for over the past 20 years, everything I thought I was protecting and building for my family, and here my wife was swiping through Tinder behind my back like I was just some extra paycheck waiting to be replaced with someone more exciting. I didn't sleep at all that night. Actually, I didn't even try to sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling while she snored peacefully next to me, acting like nothing in the world was wrong. She had no idea that I knew about the phone yet, and I was stuck in that awful middle ground between wanting to burn everything down right that moment and knowing I needed to play this smart. I kept telling myself, don't just react emotionally. Don't let her spin this situation or catch you off guard. Get all the information first, then make your move. So I started watching her behavior much more closely over the following days. Every time she got a notification and tilted her phone away from me, I made a mental note. Every time she left the room in the middle of texting someone, I logged it in my memory. I even started checking her shared Google Calendar to see if she was creating fake errands or logging meetups that didn't actually correspond to where she said she was going. She was doing exactly that. I found entries for things like Target run and yoga class in locations where she never actually went. I wasn't even angry at that point. I was just completely blown away by how sloppy and careless she had become. For someone who was supposedly trying to be sneaky and cover her tracks, she was leaving a trail of evidence that a half-blind person could follow without much effort. Then came the day when she made a crucial mistake. She left the burner phone at home by accident. She had apparently shoved it under our mattress, probably thinking she was being clever about hiding it. While she was out getting her nails done, another one of her regular expensive appointments, I pulled the phone out and scrolled through the most recent message conversations. One guy was sending her detailed hotel recommendations, complete with room types and amenities, like they were actively planning some kind of romantic weekend getaway. Another man had just sent her $50 through Venmo with a note calling her his little escape from reality. There were 3 different conversation threads that all started with almost identical pickup lines about how she wasn't like other women on dating apps. It was like reading a playbook for someone pretending to be unhappy and trapped, all while living in a completely paid-off home with a husband who had literally fixed her car the week before. She had developed an entire routine for these interactions, a whole persona based on being this misunderstood woman stuck in a loveless marriage with a man who didn't appreciate her. I took screenshots of everything. Every conversation, every photo she had sent, every plan they had made. I sent all of it to a hidden cloud drive that I created that same day, and I backed everything up twice. Once in the cloud folder and once on a USB drive that I kept locked in my desk at work. If this situation was inevitably heading toward divorce proceedings, and let's be honest, we were clearly headed in that direction, I wasn't going to walk into court empty-handed. Later that week, I finally decided to confront her directly. I didn't want to play games or try to trick her into confessing. I just walked up to her and asked straight out, "Is there something going on that I should know about?" She froze for just a split second, and I could see the gears turning in her head before she put on that fake, confused smile that people do when they're pretending not to understand a question they know exactly the meaning of. "What do you mean?" she asked, tilting her head like she was genuinely puzzled. I didn't blink or look away. "I mean, are you cheating on me?" She scoffed and acted like I had just asked her if the sky was green. "Are you serious right now?" "Wow, Marcus, you really think that low of me?" I didn't say anything in response. I just reached over calmly, opened the nightstand drawer, and pulled out the burner phone. I placed it right there on the bed between us, like evidence in a courtroom. Her entire face changed instantly. She looked at that phone like it was a bomb that someone had just tossed into her lap. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice immediately shifting from confusion to panic. "You left it under the mattress," I replied calmly. "Real secret agent stuff there, Victoria." She grabbed the phone quickly and clutched it against her chest like it was something fragile that needed protection. "It's not what you think," she said immediately. Before I had even asked for an explanation, I wasn't actually cheating on you. Then what is it? I asked, keeping my voice level and controlled. I was just talking to people, just texting back and forth. That's not the same thing as cheating. I let that statement hang in the air for a moment before responding. So, making specific plans to meet strange men at hotels and telling them that you're stuck in a loveless marriage with a husband who doesn't understand you? That's what exactly? A support group? She rolled her eyes in exasperation, like I was the one being unreasonable. You're twisting everything around and making it sound worse than it actually was. I never physically did anything with anyone. It was just words, just conversations. I needed to feel seen and appreciated by someone. I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing from her. You're living in a house that I paid off completely. You're driving a car that I maintain and keep running. You're eating food that I work every day to put on our table. And while I'm sitting at my office working or at home fixing whatever's broken this week, you're out here needing to feel seen and appreciated by random guys named Brent and Marco? She didn't have an answer for that. She just crossed her arms defensively like she was trying to protect herself from being called out on her behavior. Then, predictably, the tears started flowing. Not the quiet, sad kind of crying either. These were big, messy, gasping sobs like she was the one who had been betrayed and hurt in this situation. You weren't emotionally there for me, she shouted through her tears. You checked out of this marriage years ago. You never wanted to do anything fun or spontaneous. You never spoiled me or made me feel special. You never looked at me the way these other men do. I didn't raise my voice, didn't throw anything, didn't lose my temper. I just stood there staring at her like I was looking at a complete stranger because, honestly, at that point, that's exactly what it felt like. I was looking at someone I didn't recognize anymore. If that's really how you feel about our marriage and about me, I said quietly, then you should leave. That response completely broke her down. The angry, defensive crying immediately turned into desperate pleading. Her whole voice changed, becoming softer and more vulnerable than I'd heard it in years. We can fix this, she said, reaching out to try to grab my hand. Please, Marcus, don't give up on us like this. I was in a pretty dark headspace at that moment, but I remained calm. It didn't mean anything, she continued desperately. I was just confused and lonely. But it meant enough for you to hide a phone, I replied. It meant enough for you to lie to me every single day. It meant enough for you to risk everything we had built together. And not because you were genuinely unhappy with our life, but because you thought there might be something better or more exciting out there waiting for you. That was the exact moment when I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't going to be fixing anything. I wasn't going to be working on our marriage or going to counseling or pretending that this was just a rough patch we could get through together. I was completely done pretending that any of this could be repaired, but I didn't want her to know that yet. I told her that I needed some space and time to think about everything that had happened. She agreed to give me that space, probably thinking that the extra time would work in her favor, that she could figure out a way to spin this situation or guilt me into forgetting about what I'd discovered. The next day, I told my boss that I needed to take some time off for personal reasons. He was understanding about it and didn't ask too many questions, which I appreciated. I used that time away from work to start lining up meetings with divorce attorneys. I wanted to make sure I was fully prepared before making any moves that I couldn't take back. I ended up choosing a lawyer who came highly recommended from a colleague who had gone through his own divorce a few years earlier. This guy specialized in high-asset divorce cases and had a calm, no-nonsense energy that I really liked. We talked for over an hour during our initial consultation, and I laid out everything for him. The money situation, all of our assets, the house ownership, and of course, the fake Tinder romance novels that Victoria had been writing behind my back. He asked me detailed questions about whether Victoria had access to any of our investment accounts or retirement funds. Fortunately, she didn't have access to those. She only had access to our joint checking account that we use for household expenses and day-to-day spending. He told me that step 1 was immediately shutting down any account that she could potentially drain before divorce papers were officially served. Step 2 was thoroughly documenting everything, which I had already started doing. Step 3, and this was going to be the hardest part psychologically, was acting completely normal for a little while longer so that she wouldn't suspect anything and try to get ahead of the legal proceedings. So that's exactly what I did. I smiled at dinner like nothing had changed. I asked her about her day and how her various appointments had gone. I even told her that I wanted us to work on rebuilding our marriage and that I was committed to making things better between us. And honestly, she completely bought into this act. She started behaving sweetly again, like she had been magically cured of all her attitude problems overnight. She even started cooking dinner a few times a week, which was genuinely funny to me because she hadn't bothered to cook a meal in over a year. She told me repeatedly that she missed how things used to be between us, and that she wanted to get back to being the couple we were when we first got married. So I kept playing along, pretending that I was genuinely interested in fixing something that she had already completely destroyed. Meanwhile, I was working closely with my attorney to make sure that every single asset I had worked to build was properly protected from her inevitable attempt to take as much as possible. The weird part about this whole process was that I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt completely done with the entire situation. Not in some dramatic, emotional way, just flat and checked out, like someone had unplugged something important inside me, and I wasn't even trying to fix it. That emotional detachment probably made it easier to maintain the pretense that everything was fine, because I wasn't fighting internal rage or bitterness every time I looked at her. I leaned into the good husband trying to save his marriage act so thoroughly that it actually started to feel normal after a while. I started complimenting Victoria's cooking again, and even helped Sophia with a big school project, acting like our family was perfectly stable and happy. Meanwhile, I was checking in with my lawyer every few days to make sure all the legal paperwork was progressing and that everything would be completely airtight when the time came. We systematically moved everything that could legally be moved. Assets that I had acquired before our marriage were secured and documented. A couple of retirement accounts were quietly transferred into a trust structure with specific clauses designed to block any attempt at division during divorce proceedings. The house was carefully transferred to a holding entity under a different name. Nothing we did was sketchy or illegal. It was all perfectly legitimate and well-timed legal maneuvering. And then I decided to add one final layer to this whole strategy. One night after dinner, while I was washing dishes and Victoria was scrolling through her phone like usual, I casually mentioned something that I knew would get her attention. "Oh, I got an interesting call from my cousin today," I said in a conversational tone. "Which cousin?" she asked, looking up from her screen. "My mom's brother's son. You remember, the one whose dad had that farm out in Colorado. Apparently, my uncle's estate might finally be getting settled after all these years." She immediately became more interested. "What do you mean?" "Well, my uncle never had any kids of his own, and apparently there's some property and investment accounts that have been tied up in legal proceedings. I don't know exactly how much money we're talking about, but it sounds like it could be something significant." I watched her face carefully as I continued. "The lawyers are still figuring everything out, but it might end up being split between me and a couple of other relatives. Could be nothing, or it could be a substantial windfall. Too early to tell." She tried to look unimpressed and casual, but I could see the gears turning in her head immediately. Her whole posture changed, and she started asking follow-up questions within 2 minutes. None of them were even remotely subtle. Things like, "Do you know if the inheritance will be split evenly between all the relatives, or does it just go to you? And would that money be considered shared marital income if it comes through?" I played completely dumb and told her it was way too early in the process to know any details. The lawyers were still sorting through everything, and it could take months to resolve. It might end up being nothing at all, I told her, but there was a chance it could be life-changing money. From that night forward, Victoria's entire attitude shifted dramatically. She started sleeping in our bed again instead of making excuses to sleep in the guest room. She began packing lunch for me to take to work, something she hadn't done in literally years. I would come home from the office to find scented candles burning throughout the house and elaborate dinners waiting on the stove. I almost laughed out loud the first time this happened, but I managed to keep a straight face. Instead, I smiled warmly, thanked her for the thoughtful gesture, and told her how much I appreciated the effort she was putting into making our home feel special again. She was eating up every word of praise I gave her. I even started opening up to her about feeling emotionally distant over the past few months and expressing my genuine desire to repair our relationship. That approach really sealed the deal for her. She began actively pushing the idea of couples therapy, suggesting that we should work with a professional to rebuild our communication and trust. Of course, she wasn't suggesting therapy because she actually wanted to fix our marriage. She was probably planning to use those sessions to build a case for herself in court later, making it look like she was the spouse who tried to save the relationship while I remained cold and unresponsive. So I agreed enthusiastically to the couples therapy idea. I told her that working with a counselor sounded like exactly what we needed to get back on track. We never actually ended up going to any sessions, though, because I somehow kept forgetting to book the appointments every time she brought it up. Around this same time, Sophia started acting strange in a different way. Instead of her usual pattern of ignoring me or rolling her eyes at everything I said, she began asking oddly personal questions about our family's financial situation. Things like, "How much money do you make per year again, Dad?" And "Do we have a college fund set up for me?" And Do you think we might be able to move to a bigger house at some point? I gave her vague, non-committal answers to these questions, but I made sure to keep mentioning things like, we'll see what happens with this potential inheritance situation. And a lot depends on how Uncle's estate gets settled. That phrase became my magic key to keeping both Victoria and Sophia interested, cooperative, and just polite enough to avoid raising any red flags about my true intentions. Both of them remained just greedy enough to wait patiently for what they thought would be a major financial windfall, rather than making any dramatic moves that might jeopardize their access to that imaginary money. While Victoria and Sophia were busy waiting for their imaginary payday, I continued systematically documenting everything that was happening in our household. I made copies of all the joint account statements that showed Victoria's unauthorized withdrawals over the past several months. I printed out screenshots of the messages from her burner phone, making sure to capture not just the flirty conversations, but also the parts where she complained about being stuck in a loveless marriage with a financially controlling husband. I even started audio recording some of our conversations, particularly during arguments when she would say particularly damaging things. Nothing sneaky or hidden, just recordings of public disagreements where she made statements like, "I don't owe you loyalty just because you pay for everything, and maybe if you actually treated me like a woman instead of a roommate, I wouldn't need attention from other men." Those kinds of statements tend to carry a lot of weight in divorce proceedings, especially when they're coming from someone who's trying to claim they were the victim in the relationship. I let Victoria and Sophia continue building their little mother-daughter alliance against me, thinking they were positioning themselves to walk away with the majority of our assets when everything fell apart. They had absolutely no idea that I had already moved the house into a protective trust, or that the real wealth wasn't sitting in any of the accounts they could see or access. But I wasn't planning to reveal any of that information until the legal paperwork was completely ready and filed. Then came my final check-in meeting with my attorney. He reviewed everything we had prepared and told me that we were ready to proceed. Every asset that needed to be moved had been moved. Everything that could be legally protected and locked down was secure. The documentation was thorough and well organized. The only remaining decision was about timing. When exactly did I want to pull the trigger on this whole process? I asked him directly, should I file the papers now, or is there any advantage to waiting longer? He explained that it was ultimately my decision, but that the sooner I filed, the fewer opportunities Victoria would have to interfere with our carefully laid plans. This was especially important since I was the one who had the comprehensive paper trail and evidence, while she would be caught completely off guard by the legal proceedings. So I told him, let's do it. I'm ready to move forward. That night, Victoria was in the living room watching some reality television show, while Sophia sat on the floor next to her scrolling through TikTok videos. I looked at both of them sitting there, so focused on their phones and their entertainment, and felt absolutely nothing. Not anger, not guilt, not sadness. Just completely done with this entire chapter of my life. I grabbed a soda from the refrigerator, sat down at the kitchen table, and started thinking about practical details for my future. Not metaphorically or emotionally, but literally planning out what I wanted my next living situation to look like. Did I want to rent an apartment or buy a smaller house? What kind of home office setup would I need for my work? Would I finally invest in that ridiculously expensive espresso machine that I'd been bookmarking online for months? While Victoria and Sophia were busy strategizing about how to squeeze more money out of me and planning for their share of the fictional inheritance, I was mentally designing my new life of peace and independence. And they were so focused on their schemes that they had no idea what was coming. The day the divorce papers were served was a Wednesday. I deliberately timed it so that Victoria would be home when the process server arrived, but Sophia would be at school. I figured this would give Victoria some time to react and process what was happening without immediately dragging our daughter into the middle of the storm. Not that Victoria waited very long to involve Sophia anyway, but at least I tried to give her that courtesy. I wasn't at the house when the process server showed up. My lawyer had advised me that it's generally better to handle the service that way. It keeps things cleaner, reduces the chances of immediate confrontation, and eliminates the possibility of dramatic scenes or accusations that I had orchestrated the whole thing for maximum emotional impact. So I let my attorney handle the logistics while I went to grab coffee and sat in my car for a couple of hours, giving Victoria space to scream at the walls or do whatever she needed to do to process this bombshell. By the time I walked through our front door that evening, she was already positioned and waiting for me. Her arms were crossed defensively, her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and her face had that tight, controlled expression that people get when they're trying really hard to stay composed, but they're only about 2 words away from completely losing it. "So that's it?" she asked the moment I put my bag down. You blindside me with divorce papers like a complete coward instead of talking to me like an adult? I walked calmly into the kitchen and responded without raising my voice. You told me repeatedly that you were unhappy in this marriage. I'm simply giving you exactly what you said you wanted. That's when she completely lost control. She didn't even pause to think about her response. You're punishing me. That's what this really is, she shouted. You couldn't handle the fact that I wanted more from life than just being your quiet little housewife, so now you're playing the victim and trying to destroy me financially. I leaned against the kitchen counter and replied calmly, Victoria, you were actively using Tinder to meet other men. You had a secret phone hidden in our bedroom. You were making specific plans to meet strangers at hotels. You told multiple people that I was some cold, controlling miser who was keeping you trapped in an unhappy marriage. So explain to me how I'm the one playing victim here. So what, Marcus? She snapped back. I needed someone to talk to. I felt completely alone in this marriage for years, and every single time I tried to communicate that to you, you acted like I was being overly dramatic or unreasonable. Right, I said, maintaining my calm tone. So instead of actually talking to me about these problems, you decided to go shopping around for a better option behind my back. She scoffed at that characterization. You think I wanted to do that? Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to live with someone who constantly makes you feel like a burden? Like everything you want or need is just too much trouble or not practical enough. I raised an eyebrow. A $900 purse isn't a necessity, Victoria. And you had a burner phone hidden in our house. That wasn't about feeling dismissed or unheard. That was straight-up betrayal. Then she started making even more desperate accusations. She said I had manipulated her and that I must have been planning this divorce for months without telling her. She accused me of deliberately hiding money from her, which was ironic since I had actually just protected what was rightfully mine. She said I was trying to ruin her life out of spite. But my personal favorite accusation was when she screamed, You tricked me into staying by lying about that inheritance. You made me think we were going to come into all this money. Yeah, that fictional inheritance that she had never even bothered to ask for proof of. She just heard the word inheritance and immediately assumed she had hit the jackpot without doing any due diligence whatsoever. I calmly told her that I hadn't actually lied about anything. Maybe you chose to believe it was real and substantial without asking any questions. That's on you, not me. She didn't have much to say after that response. She just started pacing around the kitchen and mumbling about getting her own lawyer, which I encouraged her to do. And I have to say, the lawyer that Victoria hired was wildly unprepared for the amount of comprehensive documentation that I had carefully assembled over the previous months. She walked into those legal proceedings expecting to find hidden offshore accounts and gold bars that her legal team could grab. But what she discovered instead was a meticulously organized portfolio that had been strategically trimmed down to include only genuinely shared marital assets. Basically just the stuff that I had deliberately allowed her to see throughout our marriage. Even more damaging to her case were her own messages from the Tinder conversations, particularly the ones where she explicitly stated that she felt trapped in a boring marriage with a man who was too cheap to love her properly. That particular quote became a centerpiece of the proceedings and really undermined any attempt she made to portray herself as the victim of financial abuse. Within just a few days of the legal process beginning, Sophia had figured out what was happening. Not because Victoria and I sat down and explained the situation to her directly, but because Victoria had started slamming kitchen cabinets and crying openly during the middle of the day. The whole atmosphere in our house had become tense and dramatic, and it was impossible to hide from a 16-year-old who lived there. I came home from work one evening to find Sophia sitting on the stairs with her arms folded, clearly waiting to confront me. "Why are you divorcing Mom?" she asked directly. I sat down next to her on the steps and decided to be completely honest. "Because your mother has been cheating on me with multiple men she met online, and because she told those same men that she was only staying with me for financial security." She looked genuinely confused by this information. Not shocked or devastated, just like she wasn't sure how to process what I had told her. Then she asked a question that really stuck with me. "Are we going to be poor now?" That response hit me harder than I expected. Not, "Are we going to be okay as a family?" or "Will you and Mom be able to work things out?" Just a direct jump to concerns about money and lifestyle. I didn't even know how to respond to that kind of priority system. I told her something vague like, "You'll be taken care of, so don't worry about that." But in my head, I was thinking about how this confirmed everything I had suspected. The money and the lifestyle had become the primary concern for both of them, not the actual family relationships or emotional connections between us. Victoria started blowing up my phone after that initial confrontation, sending me constant text messages throughout the day. Things like, We can fix this if you just give us a chance, and I wasn't thinking straight, but this isn't what I really want. And please don't throw away 20 years of marriage over a mistake. I ignored every single one of these messages, not because I was trying to be cruel or cold, but because there was genuinely nothing left to discuss or negotiate. She had made her choices very clearly, and I had simply stopped pretending that I was okay with those choices. After a few days of being ignored, she tried switching to a different approach. She got quiet and started acting civil and reasonable, like maybe we could work out some kind of amicable arrangement. But then she tried pulling Sophia directly into the conflict by telling her things like, "Your dad is trying to take everything away from us," and "He's being vindictive because his feelings got hurt." I appreciated that Sophia came to me with this information instead of just believing it automatically. She asked me directly if it was true that I was trying to take everything from them out of spite. I told her honestly, "I'm protecting what I built over the past 20 years. Your mom is still going to get more than enough money to live comfortably, but no, she doesn't get to take everything I worked for. She doesn't get to betray our marriage and then walk away with the majority of our assets." And the reality was that Victoria really wasn't going to see the kind of financial windfall she had been expecting. When the comprehensive financial review finally took place, Victoria's attorney came into the proceedings expecting to uncover hidden treasure chests and offshore accounts that they could claim as marital property. What they actually discovered instead was a carefully managed portfolio that had been strategically reduced to include only assets that were genuinely shared between us during our marriage. Essentially, just the financial accounts and property that I had deliberately allowed her to have visibility into over the years. Everything else had been legally protected as premarital assets, or had been properly moved into accounts and trust structures that she had no legitimate claim to under state divorce laws. She didn't get the house because it had been transferred into a protective legal entity. She didn't get access to the substantial investment accounts because they were properly documented as assets I had acquired before our marriage. She didn't even get the full custody arrangement she had been expecting because the judge wasn't impressed by her attempts to claim I was emotionally manipulative and financially abusive. The court records simply didn't support any of those accusations. If anything, when the judge reviewed our spending reports and bank statements, he raised some pointed questions about her pattern of unauthorized withdrawals and her general financial responsibility during our marriage. What Victoria did receive was reasonable alimony payments, access to some of our shared savings accounts, and a car. It was genuinely enough money for her to live comfortably if she was smart about budgeting and managing her expenses responsibly. The problem was that Victoria had never been particularly smart about money management, and she certainly wasn't going to start now. Within just 1 month of our divorce being finalized, she was already complaining loudly about how tight her financial situation had become. She had to cancel her expensive spa membership because she couldn't afford the monthly fees. She had to significantly cut back on her shopping habits and expensive girls' trips. She was learning very quickly what it actually cost to maintain the lifestyle she had been taking for granted while I was paying for everything. Meanwhile, I was still living in the same house I had been living in for years. I was still doing the same job that I enjoyed and was good at. And for the first time in several years, I was sleeping well through the entire night without worrying about what financial damage might be happening behind my back or what lies I might discover the next day. Sophia made the decision to stay with Victoria, at least initially. I didn't fight that choice or try to pressure her into changing her mind. I could see that she still didn't fully understand what had actually happened between her mother and me, and I wasn't going to beg my own daughter to choose me over her mother. I told her that my door would always be open whenever she was ready to have a real conversation or spend time together, and that was all I could do at that point. About 2 weeks after our divorce was completely finalized, Victoria showed up at my house without calling or asking permission first. She had that artificially calm expression on her face. Her hair was perfectly done, her nails were freshly manicured, and her voice was soft and controlled like absolutely nothing dramatic had ever happened between us. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for how everything went down," she said, standing on my doorstep like she was delivering a rehearsed speech. I didn't realize how far apart we had grown or how badly I was handling my unhappiness. I think I made some really poor decisions that I regret now. I didn't interrupt her or argue with anything she was saying. I just stood there and let her continue with whatever she had planned to tell me. She continued explaining that she missed the life we had built together, that she hadn't been thinking clearly during the worst parts of our marriage problems, that Sophia was struggling with the family changes, and that maybe if we could just sit down and have an honest conversation about everything, we might be able to work something out. I nodded slowly while she spoke, then looked her directly in the eye and asked one simple question. Are you still using Tinder? She froze completely. Her lips moved slightly like she was about to say something, but no actual words came out of her mouth. She just stood there staring at me, unable to formulate any kind of response. I opened my front door wider and said politely, "Thanks for stopping by, Victoria. I hope things get easier for you going forward." And that was it. No yelling, no dramatic confrontation, no emotional begging on my part. She walked back to her car and I went back inside to continue watching my television show. Then, on a random Thursday evening a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Sophia sent me a text message that simply said, "Hey, can I come by this weekend?" I stared at that message for quite a while before responding. It wasn't cold or hostile like her communications had been for months, but it wasn't particularly warm or casual either. It was just simple and direct, which felt like something new coming from her. That straightforward approach was different from the attitude she had been carrying around for so long. I texted back, "Sure, that would be fine." She replied, "Okay, Saturday afternoon work for you?" When she showed up at my door that Saturday, she looked noticeably different. Not like she had changed her hairstyle or her clothes, but she seemed smaller somehow, like some of that defensive attitude she used to carry around had melted away over the past few weeks. She sat down on my couch like she wasn't quite sure where to start the conversation she had come to have. "I'm not here to ask you for money," she said immediately, before I had even asked her why she wanted to visit. "Just so you know that up front." I couldn't help but smirk a little at that opening. "All right, that's definitely a good start to whatever this conversation is going to be." She looked down at her hands and took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about everything that happened. All of it. The stuff with Mom, the way I acted toward you, the things I said. I didn't really understand what was going on at the time, or maybe I just didn't want to understand it. I guess it was easier to just believe what she was telling me because it meant I didn't have to think too hard about who was actually right or wrong. I didn't say anything in response. I just sat there and let her talk through whatever she had come to tell me, because it seemed like she had been thinking about this for a while and needed to get it out. "I shouldn't have talked to you the way I did," she said quietly, still looking at her hands instead of making eye contact. "I was awful to you, and you didn't deserve that treatment. You were the only one who was actually trying to take care of our family, and I didn't see that then, but I definitely see it now." I remained quiet, listening carefully, but not wanting to jump in too early and make it harder for her to say whatever she needed to say. "I guess I just wanted to say that I'm sorry," she finally said, looking up at me for the first time since she had sat down. "For picking sides without getting the whole story. For not asking the right questions when things started getting weird. For assuming that you were the bad guy in all of this when you were actually the one trying to hold everything together." I nodded acknowledgingly. "Thank you for saying that, Sophia. I really appreciate you coming here to tell me this." She looked surprised that I didn't have more to say in response, so I added, "I never stopped loving you, even when things got really difficult between us. But yeah, that whole situation hurt more than I expected it to. You believed everything your mother told you about me, and it felt like I lost both of you at the same time instead of just losing my marriage." She looked like she wanted to cry but was trying to hold it together. "I know I did that," she said. I believed her completely, and she still acts like she's the victim in all of this even now. But I'm starting to see through that narrative, and I'm not proud of how I acted, Dad. I'm really not." I nodded again. "I understand that you were caught in the middle of something really ugly and complicated. It wasn't entirely your fault that you got pulled into taking sides. But I'm glad you're here now and that we can talk about this honestly." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while after that. There was no big dramatic hug or sudden return to exactly how our relationship used to be, but the atmosphere between us felt clearer and more honest than it had in months. It was like the wall that had been built between us had finally cracked enough for something real and genuine to come through. Before she left that afternoon, she asked if she could start stopping by more often to spend time together. I told her, "My door is always open for you. Just knock next time instead of surprising me, because I'm not particularly good at handling unexpected visitors." She laughed a little at that. "Noted, Dad." And just like that, we took a small but meaningful step back toward being an actual family again. Not the fake version that Victoria had tried to sell her, but the real one based on honesty and genuine care for each other.